I had wanted to be a park ranger for as long as I could remember. The idea of spending every day surrounded by nature, hiking through rugged trails, camping beneath the stars, and hearing the wind whistle through the trees, those thoughts consumed my childhood. I spent hours fantasizing about a life in the wilderness, a life of purpose, protecting the land and those who visited it. Once I discovered that being a park ranger was a real profession, it became my singular goal. I dedicated myself to it like an astronaut training for a mission to space. The path wasn't easy. There were requirements, hurdles I needed to overcome to even be considered for the role. You had to be an expert outdoorsman, physically fit, and adept with firearms, especially if you were working in areas with bears or mountain lions. You needed to be trained in first aid and have certifications in navigation, search and rescue, and more, but none of that scared me off. If anything, it drove me harder. Throughout my late teenage years and into my early 20s, I transformed my bedroom into what could only be described as a shrine to my dream. A corkboard covered one wall, filled with requirements for the job, photos of sprawling national parks and lists of certifications I needed. Each time I checked something off, it felt like I was inching closer to destiny. I worked odd jobs and saved every penny, funneling all my money into tuition for a program in conservation enforcement at a local community college. It wasn't the fanciest school, but it was all I could afford. After years of preparation, I graduated with my diploma, feeling like I was finally ready to step into the career I had dreamed of. But reality hit hard. The applications I sent out were met with rejection after rejection. Every "we regret to inform you" email chipped away at my enthusiasm. By the time I received my 30th rejection, I was convinced the hiring managers knew my resume by heart. Still, I kept trying, and then at last it happened. The Forestry Service offered me a job not as a full-fledged park ranger, but as a fire lookout stationed at one of the remote towers. When I got the offer, I shouted, "Yes!" so loudly into the phone that my soon-to-be supervisor, a man named Robert, burst out laughing. He said he looked forward to meeting me and showing me the ropes. The pay wasn't great, but it didn't matter. This was my first step into the life I'd always wanted. The training at Fire Tower 16 was straightforward, and Robert turned out to be a great mentor. He was the kind of guy who made everything feel less like a chore and more like an adventure. We'd spend our downtime playing chess or reading books while keeping an eye on the forest below. Sometimes it got a little boring clearing brush, taking out the trash, monitoring the radio for reports, but I didn't care. I was finally doing what I loved. Everything changed on the last day of my training. Robert and I were sitting in the fire tower's cabin, idly chatting over a game of chess, when he noticed something unusual. Through the binoculars, he pointed out a thin wisp of smoke rising from the trees in the distance. "Looks like someone set up camp where they're not supposed to," he said, his tone tinged with annoyance. "No one gets camping permits anymore." I raised the binoculars to my eyes and followed his gesture. Sure enough, a faint column of smoke twisted up into the clear blue sky, barely noticeable against the backdrop of the forest. "You want me to handle it?" I asked, eager to prove myself. He hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, this is a good test for you, but wait, look over there." He pointed again, this time to another plume of smoke, closer to the first. His brow furrowed. "Two of them." "What the hell?" Robert leaned back in his chair, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Then he turned to me with a wry smile. "All right, this is your last day of training. Time to see what you're made of. We'll split up. You take one, I'll take the other. We'll stay in radio contact the whole time. Sound good?" I wasn't sure if I was ready to handle this on my own, but I nodded. "Let's do it. Just remember the basics," Robert said as we descended the wooden staircase of the tower. "Don't engage with anyone if they get confrontational. Write the citation, tell them to pack up and move on. If you need backup, radio me. Simple." We drove down the dirt road in our Jeep until we reached the first site. An old, beat-up truck was parked by the roadside, its doors locked but its windows rolled down. "This one's yours," Robert said, pulling to a stop. "Go check it out, and let me know if you need help." I stepped out of the Jeep and shouldered my pack, filled with basic supplies and my rifle, just in case. As Robert drove off to handle the second campsite, I took a deep breath and started walking toward the smoke in the distance. The forest was dense, with thick underbrush that clawed at my legs as I pushed through. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the faint scent of campfire smoke guided me like a beacon. I followed a trail of crushed vegetation and boot prints, evidence of the campers dragging a cooler through the brush. It didn't take long before I stumbled upon something I hadn't expected. In a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees, stood a massive stone archway. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The structure was ancient-looking, built from weathered grey stones that were cracked and covered in moss. It loomed at least 15 feet high, casting a long shadow over the clearing. What caught my attention most, though, was what lay beyond the arch. Through the opening, the sky looked completely different. Instead of the bright blue I'd been walking under, the sky on the other side of the arch was a deep, bruised purple, streaked with dark clouds that swirled like smoke. It didn't make sense. I looked behind me at the normal sky, then back through the arch. The stark contrast was impossible to ignore. A wave of unease washed over me as I approached the archway. My stomach churned, and a pins and needles sensation rippled through my limbs, as if my body was warning me not to get too close. But I couldn't help myself. Something about the arch seemed to pull me forward, urging me to step through. When I did, the feeling was instantaneous. It was as if I had crossed an invisible barrier. My skin tingled, my ears popped, and for a brief moment, my vision blurred. Then it passed. I found myself standing on the other side, and everything felt wrong. The forest was still there, but it was different. The trees seemed taller, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The air was heavy and humid, pressing against my skin like a damp blanket. And the sky above was that same ominous purple, the clouds churning with an unnatural energy. I took a few tentative steps forward, my boots crunching against the dry, brittle leaves that carpeted the forest floor. It was eerily quiet, no birds chirping, no rustling of small animals, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. "Robert, come in," I said into my radio, my voice trembling slightly. Static crackled in response, but there was no voice on the other end. "Robert, do you copy?" I tried again, but still, nothing. Panic began to creep in. I turned to look back at the archway, only to find it gone. The clearing where it had stood was now empty, the trees closing in around me as if to swallow me whole. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that I must have gotten turned around somehow. But as I retraced my steps, I realized that nothing looked familiar. It was as if the forest itself had shifted, the paths twisting and bending in ways that defied logic. I pulled out my compass, hoping to get my bearings, but the needle spun erratically, refusing to settle on any direction. Then, with a sudden jolt, the glass face of the compass shattered, and the needle shot out like a bullet, disappearing into the trees. "Shit," I muttered under my breath, my heart pounding. The sky grew darker, the clouds thickening overhead. A low rumble of thunder echoed through the forest, though the sound was strange, warbled, distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I felt a growing sense of dread, as if the forest itself was alive and watching me. "Robert!" I screamed into the radio, my voice raw with desperation. "Robert, please, I need help." But the only response was static. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. My legs trembled as I tried to make sense of my surroundings, but nothing felt real anymore. The weight of the air, the oppressive silence, the unnatural hues of the sky, all of it pressed down on me, crushing my sense of reality. My heart raced, and sweat dripped down my forehead as I struggled to fight the panic threatening to consume me. I needed to focus. I needed a plan. The first step was to get back to the clearing where the archway had been. If I could find it again, maybe it would return. Maybe this whole nightmare would end. I turned and began retracing my steps, or at least I thought I was. The forest was disorienting. The trees twisted and gnarled in ways that seemed designed to confuse me. Every path I took seemed to loop back on itself, leading me deeper into the woods rather than toward the clearing. As I pushed through the underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My skin prickled with unease, and every shadow seemed to shift and move in the corner of my vision. The trees creaked and groaned as if whispering secrets to each other, and the wind carried faint sounds that I couldn't quite place, like distant laughter, warped and echoing. And then I heard it. A rustling sound, faint at first but growing louder with each step. I froze, gripping the rifle slung over my shoulder, my fingers trembling as they tightened around the stock. The sound came from my right, moving closer. I squinted into the trees, my breath catching in my throat as I caught a glimpse of movement. It was humanoid, but wrong in every conceivable way. The figure moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its limbs too long and its body hunched over like a predator stalking its prey. Its skin was a sickly greyish blue, mottled and glistening as if coated in slime. And then there were its arms, 4 of them, each ending in long claw-like fingers that twitched and flexed as it moved. Its face was obscured by a tangle of black hair that hung down like a curtain, but I could see the faint glint of golden, reflective eyes peering out from behind the strands. They locked onto me, and a predatory grin spread across its face, revealing jagged yellow teeth. My heart pounded in my chest as the creature took a step closer, then another. Its movements were deliberate, almost playful, as if it was savoring the fear radiating off me. I stumbled backward, my boots catching on the uneven ground. "Stay back!" I shouted, raising the rifle. My voice wavered, betraying my terror. The creature stopped, tilting its head as if considering my words. Then, to my horror, it opened its mouth and mimicked my voice perfectly. "Stay back!" it repeated, the words distorted and drawn out as though they were being played through a broken speaker. I pulled the trigger, the rifle kicking against my shoulder as the shot rang out. The sound was deafening in the stillness of the forest, but the bullet only grazed the creature's arm. It hissed, more in annoyance than pain, and lunged toward me with shocking speed. I turned and ran, the underbrush tearing at my legs as I sprinted through the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart felt like it would burst from my chest. I could hear the creature behind me, its footfalls heavy and deliberate, the snapping of branches and rustling of leaves growing louder with each passing second. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to keep running, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees forming a labyrinth that twisted and turned, offering no clear path. Then, just as I thought my lungs would give out, I burst into a clearing. Relief washed over me as I recognized it. It was the spot where the archway had been. But my relief was short-lived. The archway was still gone, and the clearing was empty. "No, no, no!" I screamed, spinning in circles as I searched for any sign of the stone structure. It had to be here. It had to be. The rustling behind me grew louder, and I knew I didn't have much time. I scrambled to the center of the clearing, hoping against hope that the archway would reappear. My eyes darted to the edges of the clearing, where the creature's golden eyes glinted in the shadows. It stepped into the open, followed by another, and then another. There were 3 of them now, each one identical to the first. They moved in unison, their heads tilting in perfect synchronization as they studied me. "Come back," one of them said in my voice, its tone mocking and hollow. "Come back," another echoed, its voice overlapping with the first. I raised the rifle again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim. I had 3 bullets left, 3 creatures. If I missed even once, I was done for. The first one lunged, and I fired, the shot catching it in the shoulder. It staggered but didn't fall, its grin widening as if it was amused by my efforts. The second and third creatures advanced, their claws clicking together like the chittering of insects. I fired again, this time hitting one of them square in the chest. It let out a guttural screech and collapsed, writhing on the ground as dark, tar-like blood oozed from the wound. But the remaining 2 were undeterred. "Help!" I screamed into the radio, my voice cracking with desperation. "Robert, please, they're going to kill me!" Static crackled in response, followed by a faint voice. "Hold on," Robert said, his voice barely audible over the interference. "I'm coming." The radio's faint response gave me a sliver of hope, but it wasn't enough to quell the panic gripping my chest. The remaining two creatures circled me like wolves, their reflective eyes glowing in the dim purple light. They moved with a predatory grace, their forearms twitching in anticipation. I backed toward the center of the clearing, my rifle trembling in my hands. I only had one bullet left, and I knew it wouldn't be enough to take them both down. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. "Robert!" I screamed again, my voice hoarse. "Where are you?" The creatures didn't seem to care about my pleas for help. They were patient, watching me with those unnerving golden eyes, as if they knew there was no escape. One of them tilted its head and mimicked my voice again, its tone dripping with malice. "Where are you?" it repeated, the words distorted and mocking. My hands were slick with sweat, making it harder to grip the rifle. I could feel my resolve slipping, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a sound broke through the oppressive silence, the distant crack of a gunshot. The creatures froze, their heads snapping toward the direction of the sound. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. "Get down!" Robert's voice shouted from the tree line, and I didn't hesitate. I dropped to the ground just as another gunshot echoed through the clearing. Robert burst into view, his rifle raised and aimed at the nearest creature. The shot hit its mark, and the creature let out a shrill, otherworldly scream as it collapsed to the ground, twitching violently. The remaining creature snarled and lunged at Robert, its claws outstretched. He fired again, but the shot went wide, grazing its shoulder. The creature tackled him to the ground, pinning him with its forearms. "Get it off me!" Robert shouted, struggling to fend off the creature's snapping jaws. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me. Gripping the rifle tightly, I aimed at the creature's head and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and the creature's body went limp, collapsing on top of Robert. He pushed the lifeless body off of him, gasping for breath as he scrambled to his feet. "What the hell are those things?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, my own voice barely above a whisper, "but we need to get out of here." Robert and I stood in the clearing, panting heavily, our rifles now useless as they were out of ammunition. Around us the bodies of the creatures lay still, but even in death, they didn't feel fully gone. The way their twisted forms twitched slightly, like a nerve firing for the last time, made me think they could spring back to life at any moment. Their tar-like blood, thick and black, pooled around their bodies, giving off a nauseating metallic stench that stung the back of my throat. Robert turned to me, his face pale under the eerie purple sky. "What the hell is going on, Ben? What did you find out here?" "I didn't find anything," I said breathlessly. "Or maybe I found too much." "Robert, there's something wrong with this place, that archway. It wasn't just a random stone structure. It's like it's a door to another world. I think I went through it." His eyes widened. "You went through it? Are you insane?" I wanted to argue with him, but the reality of my decision weighed heavily on me now. What kind of person walks through an ominous stone archway into a place that feels fundamentally wrong? Someone too curious or too stupid for their own good, that's who. I didn't think it was going to do anything. I thought it was just a weird old ruin. But the second I stepped through, I trailed off, glancing around at the surrounding forest. Even now, the twisted trees and the unnatural hues of the sky pressed down on me like a physical weight. It was all so wrong. "I don't think we're in the same place anymore," I finished quietly. Robert took a step toward me, gripping my shoulder. His hand was trembling. "We need to get back, now." I nodded, though I didn't know how we were supposed to do that. The archway hadn't reappeared, and every step I'd taken since walking through it had only seemed to lead me deeper into this nightmare. "We'll retrace our steps," Robert said, as if reading my mind. "We'll find the jeep, and then we'll get the hell out of here." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. We set off into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The oppressive silence of the woods was shattered only by the sound of our boots crunching through the underbrush and the occasional distant crack of thunder. The eerie, distorted quality of the thunder made it clear that even the weather in this place wasn't natural. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My eyes darted to every shadow, every flicker of movement in the trees. And then there was the smell, a faint, acrid odor that seemed to follow us wherever we went. It wasn't strong enough to identify, but it set my nerves on edge. "Do you smell that?" I asked, breaking the silence. Robert glanced at me, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, it smells like..." He trailed off, unable to put it into words. We walked in silence for what felt like hours, though it was impossible to tell time in this place. The purple sky remained unchanged, the sun or whatever passed for it here, hidden behind swirling black clouds. It cast everything in a sickly, dim light that made the forest feel endless. Every so often, we'd come across something that stopped us in our tracks. A tree with deep, claw-like gashes running down its trunk. A pile of bones, picked clean, scattered across the forest floor. At one point, we found what looked like a campsite torn sleeping bags, shredded tents, and a cooler overturned and empty. Whatever had happened there, it hadn't ended well. "Jesus," Robert muttered, his voice barely audible. "How long has this been going on?" I didn't have an answer for him. But the more I saw, the more I began to realize that this place was a graveyard for the unlucky. How many people had stumbled through that archway, never to return? How many of them had fallen victim to those creatures, or worse? As we pressed on, the acrid smell grew stronger, and the oppressive silence of the forest began to give way to faint, unsettling sounds. At first, it was just the rustling of leaves, but soon I started to hear faint whispers, like voices carried on the wind. "Do you hear that?" I asked, stopping in my tracks. Robert froze, his eyes scanning the trees. "Hear what?" "Voices," I said. "They're faint, but..." Before I could finish, a loud snap echoed through the forest. Both of us whipped around, our hearts pounding, but there was nothing there. The underbrush was still, the trees swaying gently in the wind. "Let's keep moving," Robert said, his voice tight. We picked up the pace, our footsteps quick and purposeful, but the faster we walked, the louder the whispers became. They seemed to come from all around us, growing in volume until they were a cacophony of overlapping voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. And then suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. That's when I saw it. Standing a few yards ahead of us, partially obscured by the trees, was another one of those creatures. It was watching us, its reflective golden eyes glinting in the dim light. But this one was different. It was larger than the others, its body hunched and muscular with jagged scars running across its chest. Robert raised his rifle instinctively, only to realize it was empty. "Shit," he muttered under his breath, lowering the weapon. The creature tilted its head, as if amused by our helplessness. Then it stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. "We need to run," I whispered, my voice trembling. But before we could move, the creature opened its mouth, and a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard erupted from its throat. It was a high-pitched screech, followed by a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through my chest. The sound was so loud, so otherworldly, that I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears. Robert grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. "Come on!" he shouted, dragging me away from the clearing. We ran, the creature's screeches echoing behind us as it gave chase. I could hear its heavy footfalls pounding against the forest floor, its claws tearing through the underbrush. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I didn't dare slow down. The forest blurred around me as we weaved through the trees, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and that thing. But no matter how fast we ran, it was always just behind us, its guttural growls growing louder with each passing second. "Up ahead," Robert shouted, pointing to a fallen tree. We scrambled over it, our movements frantic and uncoordinated. On the other side, I stumbled and fell, landing hard on my hands and knees. Pain shot through my body, but I forced myself to get up, knowing that if I stayed down, I wouldn't get back up. The creature burst through the trees, its golden eyes locked onto me. It lunged, its claws outstretched, and I braced myself for the impact. But it never came. A gunshot rang out, and the creature let out a pained roar. I turned to see Robert standing a few yards away, holding a pistol I hadn't realized he had. "Get up!" he shouted, firing another shot. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of gunfire ringing in my ears as Robert emptied the pistol into the creature. Robert's shots brought us precious seconds, but that thing wasn't giving up. I glanced back as we ran and saw the creature shake off the bullets like they were mosquito bites. Its wounds oozed thick black blood that glistened under the bruised purple sky. But it didn't slow down. Instead, it roared in frustration, its distorted scream echoing through the forest as it bounded after us with terrifying speed. "Keep moving!" Robert yelled, his voice sharp with panic. His empty pistol was useless now, and we both knew it. I pushed my legs harder, ignoring the searing pain in my calves and the stabbing ache in my injured ankle. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my lungs burning with every step. The twisted forest seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of us, offering no sanctuary, no hiding place. And yet I couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. The creature was gaining on us, its heavy footfalls thundering closer and closer. I could feel the ground tremble beneath me, the vibrations making my heart pound even faster. The acrid stench of its breath filled the air, sour and metallic, making me gag. "Up here!" Robert shouted, veering to the left. I followed him without hesitation, trusting his instincts even though I had no idea where he was leading me. We emerged into another clearing, and for a moment, my heart leapt with hope. There, at the far end of the open space, stood the archway. It was back. The ancient stone structure loomed over the clearing, its cracked surface glowing faintly in the dim light. Through its opening, I could see the golden sunlight of my world, the world I thought I'd never see again. "It's there," I gasped, pointing to the archway. Robert saw it too, and for a brief moment a look of pure relief crossed his face. But our victory was short-lived. Behind us, the creature burst into the clearing, its forearms spread wide as it bellowed a guttural roar that shook the trees. "Go!" Robert shouted, shoving me forward. "Get through the arch." "What about you?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Don't worry about me," he snapped, raising his empty pistol like it was a club. "Just go." I hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between saving myself and staying to help him. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was nothing I could do for Robert. If I stayed, we would both die. Choking back a sob, I turned and sprinted toward the archway. The creature roared again, and I heard the sound of Robert shouting, followed by the sickening crack of bones breaking. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The archway seemed impossibly far away, each step toward it feeling like an eternity. The ground beneath me seemed to shift and warp, like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. My injured ankle throbbed with every step, and my vision blurred from exhaustion and tears. But I kept running. The air grew heavier as I approached the arch, the pins and needles sensation returning in full force. It felt like walking through a wall of static electricity, my skin tingling and my ears popping. And then finally, I was there. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the cool stone of the archway. The moment I stepped through, a wave of relief washed over me. The oppressive weight of the other world lifted, and I was enveloped in the familiar warmth of the golden sunlight. But something was wrong. As I stumbled through the archway and collapsed onto the ground, I realized the world around me wasn't as I had left it. The sky was still blue, but it was tinged with a faint, unnatural violet at the edges. The trees, though familiar, seemed darker, their leaves almost black, and the air carried a faint, acrid odor, the same one that had followed me through the other world. My stomach churned as I turned to look back at the archway. It was still there, standing tall and menacing in the clearing. But instead of the golden sunlight of my world shining through its opening, I saw only the swirling purple sky of the other side. It hadn't closed. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized what this meant. The archway was still a portal, still a door to that hellish world. And if I could come through, so could they. As if to confirm my fears, I heard a sound from the other side, a deep guttural growl that made my blood run cold. A shadow shifted within the archway, and I saw the glint of golden eyes staring back at me. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No, no, no." I scrambled to my feet, my body screaming in protest as I limped away from the archway. The growling grew louder, more insistent, and I knew I didn't have much time. I had to warn someone. I had to get help. But who would believe me? How could I explain what had happened without sounding insane? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of something stepping through the archway. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The only thing that mattered now was getting as far away as possible. I stumbled through the forest, my injured ankle slowing me down. The sunlight filtering through the trees offered little comfort, its golden glow tinged with that unnatural violet. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump, my heart racing with fear. And then finally I saw it, the road. It stretched out before me like a lifeline, its gravel surface leading back to the fire tower. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled onto the road, my boots crunching against the gravel. But that relief was short-lived. From behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and growing louder. I didn't need to turn around to know what it was. They had followed me. The fire tower came into view ahead, its wooden structure looming over the treetops like a beacon of safety. I limped as fast as I could, my injured leg threatening to give out with every step. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer, accompanied by the guttural growls and chittering noises of the creatures. I reached the base of the tower and gripped the ladder, hauling myself up rung by rung. My hands were slick with sweat and trembling with exhaustion, but I didn't stop. The growls turned into roars as the creatures reached the base of the tower. I could feel their golden eyes boring into my back as I climbed, their claws scraping against the wooden supports. "Ross!" I screamed as I reached the top. "Open the door!" The cabin door swung open and Ross appeared, his face pale with shock. "Ben, what the hell happened to you?" "No time!" I gasped, pulling myself onto the platform. "They're coming!" Ross's eyes widened as he looked past me. He grabbed his rifle from the wall and rushed to the edge of the platform. Below us, the creatures were clawing at the tower, their twisted forms writhing as they scrambled to climb. "What the fuck are those things?" Ross shouted, firing a shot. "No idea," I said, collapsing onto the floor. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath. "But they're not stopping." Ross fired another shot, the deafening crack of the rifle echoing through the forest. One of the creatures fell from the side of the fire tower, crashing into the ground below with a sickening thud. But its companions were undeterred. They clawed and scrambled, climbing over each other like frenzied ants. "Ben, what the hell did you get us into?" Ross barked, his voice filled with both fear and anger. "It's not my fault," I shouted back, pulling myself up against the wall of the cabin. "There was an archway, a portal to, I don't even know, another dimension, another world. I walked through it, and they followed me back." Ross turned to glare at me, his rifle raised as he aimed at another creature nearing the platform. "You walked through a goddamn portal. Are you kidding me right now? What part of don't do anything stupid did you not understand? Do you think I wanted this to happen?" I snapped. My voice was raw from screaming, but the panic and guilt surged through me like wildfire. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was just some old ruin. I didn't realize. Before I could finish, another creature lunged onto the platform. Its 4 arms clawed at the wooden planks, its golden eyes locked onto Ross. He fired at point-blank range, the bullet tearing through its head. Black, viscous blood sprayed across the cabin, splattering my shirt and face. Ross shoved the creature's lifeless body off the edge with his boot, then slammed the cabin door shut. "We're out of ammo!" he shouted, bolting the door. "Do you have any left?" I shook my head. I used my last shot in the clearing. Ross cursed under his breath, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. Outside, the creatures howled and roared, their claws scratching against the wood. The fire tower groaned under their weight, the structure swaying slightly with each impact. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ross stopped pacing and looked at me, his face pale but determined. "We can't stay here. They'll tear this tower down if they have to." "Then where do we go?" I demanded. "They're everywhere." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared out the window, his jaw clenched. I could see the gears turning in his head as he weighed our options. Finally, he spoke. "The archway," he said quietly. "What?" "The portal. You said it's still open, right? If they came through it, maybe we can send them back." I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. The idea of going back to that cursed clearing, back to the archway, filled me with dread. But he was right. The portal was the source of all this. If we had any hope of stopping these creatures, it was there. "But how do we close it?" I asked. "We don't even know how it works." Ross grabbed a flare gun from the supply cabinet and held it up. "We don't need to know how it works. We just need to destroy it." My stomach churned at the thought. I didn't know if the archway could even be destroyed. It felt ancient, unbreakable, like it was something beyond our understanding. But what other choice did we have? The fire tower shuddered as one of the creatures slammed into it from below, its guttural roars shaking the walls. I felt the floorboards tremble beneath me, and for a moment, I thought the whole structure might collapse. "Fine," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Let's do it." Ross nodded, his expression grim. He handed me the flare gun and grabbed a hatchet from the cabinet. "We're going to have to fight our way down," he said. "Stick close to me and don't stop moving." "Got it?" "Got it," I said, though my voice wavered. He unbolted the cabin door, and the growls and roars of the creatures grew louder. My heart pounded as he kicked the door open, revealing the chaos outside. The platform was crawling with them grey, four-armed monstrosities with gleaming golden eyes and jagged teeth. Ross swung the hatchet with brutal efficiency, the blade sinking into the nearest creature's skull. It crumpled to the ground, but two more took its place, their claws slashing at him. I raised the flare gun and fired, the bright red flare striking one of the creatures in the chest. It let out an ear-splitting shriek as flames engulfed its body. "Move!" Ross shouted, shoving me toward the ladder. I climbed down as quickly as I could, my hands slick with sweat and shaking uncontrollably. Ross followed close behind, swinging the hatchet to keep the creatures at bay. When we reached the ground, the scene was worse than I'd imagined. The forest was alive with movement, shadows darting between the trees as more creatures emerged from the darkness. Their howls filled the air, a nightmarish symphony of hunger and rage. "Run!" Ross yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the road. We sprinted through the forest, the creatures hot on our heels. My injured ankle screamed in protest, but I pushed through the pain, fueled by sheer terror. The acrid stench of the creatures grew stronger, mixing with the coppery tang of blood and the smoke from the flare. Branches whipped against my face, and the underbrush tore at my legs as we weaved through the trees. I could hear the creatures behind us, their guttural growls and snapping jaws growing louder with each step. The clearing came into view, the archway looming ahead like a dark, malevolent sentinel. My heart sank as I realized how many of the creatures had gathered around it. They moved in and out of the portal, their twisted forms silhouetted against the swirling purple sky beyond. "There's too many of them!" I shouted. Ross didn't respond. He yanked the flare gun from my hands, reloaded it, and aimed at the archway. "Cover me!" he yelled, firing a flare toward the portal. The flare struck the base of the arch, but instead of igniting, it fizzled out. The creatures howled in unison, their golden eyes snapping toward us. "It's not working!" I screamed. Ross cursed under his breath and fired again, this time aiming at the top of the arch. The flare exploded on impact, sending a shower of sparks raining down. The creatures recoiled, their movements frantic and disorganized. "Come on!" Ross shouted, pulling me toward the archway. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to run the other way. But there was no other way. If we didn't destroy the portal, these creatures would keep coming, spreading into our world like a plague. With a deep breath, I followed Ross into the clearing. The creatures closed in around us, their guttural growls growing louder, their clawed hands reaching for us with a ravenous hunger. Ross swung the hatchet wildly, each strike landing with a sickening crunch. I grabbed a branch from the ground and swung it at the nearest creature, the impact jarring my already aching arms. "Keep them back!" Ross shouted, reloading the flare gun. I lashed out at another creature, its claws raking across my arm. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but I gritted my teeth and kept swinging. The creatures were relentless, their golden eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Ross fired another flare, this one hitting the archway's keystone. The explosion sent a shockwave through the clearing, knocking us off our feet. The creatures screeched, their movements jerky and chaotic, as if the portal's instability was affecting them. The swirling purple light of the archway flickered, dimming for a moment before flaring back to life. "It's working," I shouted, scrambling to my feet. Ross didn't respond. He was locked in combat with one of the larger creatures, its claws tearing at his chest. Blood poured from his wounds, staining the ground beneath him. "Ross!" I screamed, rushing to help him, but before I could reach him, the creature lunged, its jaws closing around his throat. Ross's scream was a raw, guttural sound that pierced the chaos of the clearing. The creature's jaws tore into him, and I could see the black tar-like blood from its wounds mixing with the bright crimson of Ross's own. I froze for half a second, my brain struggling to process what was happening. But there was no time to hesitate, no time to mourn. "Get away from him!" I roared, charging toward the creature with the branch I'd been using as a weapon. I swung with all the force I could muster, the makeshift club connecting with its head. The sickening crunch of impact reverberated up my arms, but the beast barely flinched. It turned its glowing golden eyes toward me, releasing Ross's limp body as it shifted its focus. Blood dripped from its jagged teeth as it bared them in a twisted mockery of a grin. My breath hitched as it stepped closer, its forearms flexing in a grotesque display of power. I took a shaky step back, the branch trembling in my hands. "Come on, you bastard," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Let's finish this." The creature lunged, and I swung again. This time the branch shattered against its shoulder, splinters flying in all directions. It didn't even slow down. Its claws raked across my chest, ripping through fabric and flesh. Pain exploded in my body, and I stumbled backward, barely managing to stay on my feet. I glanced toward Ross, hoping, praying that he was still alive. But he wasn't moving. His lifeless eyes stared up at the dark purple sky, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. A surge of anger and despair welled up inside me, drowning out the pain. I clenched my fists, my mind racing for a solution. The archway. It was flickering, unstable. If I could destabilize it further, maybe, just maybe, it would take these things back where they came from. The flare gun. My eyes darted to the ground where Ross had dropped it during the attack. It was only a few feet away, but the creature was between me and it, pacing back and forth like a predator toying with its prey. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. All or nothing. With a burst of adrenaline, I sprinted toward the flare gun, ignoring the searing pain in my chest and the blood soaking through my shirt. The creature roared, lunging after me, but I was faster. I dove to the ground, grabbing the flare gun and rolling onto my back just as it reached me. I pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a blinding burst of light, striking the creature square in the face. It shrieked, its hands clawing at its burning flesh as flames engulfed it. I scrambled to my feet, watching as it writhed and thrashed, its golden eyes melting into black goo. But there was no time to celebrate. The other creatures were closing in, their movements frantic and uncoordinated as the flickering archway seemed to disorient them. I turned my attention to the portal, aiming the flare gun at the keystone at its top. "Come on," I muttered, my hands shaking as I reloaded. Just one more shot. The creatures howled as I fired, the flare hitting its mark. The archway shuddered violently, cracks spidering across its surface. The swirling purple light inside grew brighter, pulsating like a heartbeat. The ground beneath me trembled, and a low, otherworldly hum filled the air. The creatures stopped their advance, their golden eyes flicking between me and the portal. For the first time, they looked afraid. "It's working," I whispered, backing away as the archway began to collapse. The hum grew louder, building to an ear-splitting crescendo. The purple light exploded outward, enveloping the clearing in a blinding flash. I shielded my eyes, feeling the ground drop out from under me as the force of the blast knocked me off my feet. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the golden sunlight streaming through the trees. The archway was gone. Not just destroyed, gone, as if it had never existed. The creatures were gone too, their bodies vanishing along with the portal that had brought them here. I lay there for a long moment, staring up at the blue sky. The air smelled clean and fresh, free of the acrid stench that had followed the creatures. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs a stark contrast to the nightmare I'd just endured. But the relief was short-lived. I sat up slowly, my entire body screaming in protest. Blood stained my clothes, and my chest throbbed with pain from the creature's claws. But worse than the physical wounds was the weight of what I'd lost. Ross. I crawled over to where he lay, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch his shoulder. His skin was cold, his body still. Tears blurred my vision as I gripped his hand, muttering apologies that he'd never hear. "You didn't deserve this," I whispered. "None of us did." For a long time I sat there beside him, the forest eerily quiet around me. My mind replayed the events of the past few hours, the horrors I'd witnessed, the choices I'd made. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The archway was gone, but what if there were others? What if the creatures had found another way through? What if I wasn't the same anymore? I looked down at my hands, stained with blood, some mine, some not. My skin looked normal, but I couldn't ignore the strange tingling sensation in my abdomen, the faint but persistent itch that had been growing since I'd returned. I pulled up my shirt, my breath catching in my throat. There, just below my ribs, the skin was bulging slightly, as if something was moving beneath it. My heart raced as I pressed my fingers against the swelling. It was faint, but I could feel it, a rhythmic, pulsing movement, like fingers tapping from the inside. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." Panic clawed at my chest as I scrambled to my feet, stumbling away from Ross's body. I clutched my abdomen, my mind racing with horrific possibilities. Was this the price of crossing through the portal? Had I brought something back with me? I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure I wanted them. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Staggering toward the road, I wiped the tears from my face and forced myself to keep moving. The fire tower loomed in the distance, its familiar silhouette a stark reminder of everything I'd lost. When I reached it, I collapsed against the base, staring up at the wooden structure. For the first time, I didn't feel safe here. The forest no longer felt like home. It felt like a graveyard. In the days that followed, I reported what had happened to the authorities, or at least part of it. I told them about the rogue campers and how Ross and I had gone out to confront them. I told them we'd encountered some kind of wild animal, something aggressive and unknown. I left out the part about the archway, the creatures, and the otherworldly portal. No one would have believed me anyway. Ross was declared a casualty of a wildlife attack, and I was given medical leave to recover from my injuries. But no amount of time would heal the scars left by what I'd seen, or the guilt of leaving Ross behind. And then there was the other matter. The changes started small, a tingling in my abdomen, an itch I couldn't scratch. But over time, it grew worse. My skin would ripple and shift, like something was moving beneath the surface. At night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my body trembling with hunger, not for food, for something else. I moved to the city, far from the forests and the memories they held. I got a desk job, avoiding the outdoors as much as possible. But the cravings never went away. The hunger gnawed at me, insistent and unrelenting, and sometimes in the dead of night I'd feel them. The extra arms. They hadn't fully emerged yet, but I knew they were there, waiting. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my golden eyes gleaming in the darkness, and I smiled. The hunt was just beginning,